Hi, I made a new family movie this year based upon an old audio tape I had of my great aunt Gertrude Landry that I made back in 1975 when I was in college and she was 88 years old, actually the year before she died. Gertrude Landry was my mother's aunt, so she was my great aunt. And she came from a long distinguished family from Canada. Gert's grandfather was named Armand Landry. He was born in 1805 in New Brunswick, Canada, and he was a Canadian politician. He was the first Acadian politician. That means he represented the French vis-a-vis the English in Canada, and he was a very liberal man. He married a woman named Pelagasi Cassis, and they had 7 children, amongst which their firstborn was a man named Pierre Landry, and their second one was a man who was Gert's father named Jude Landry. You can look up on Wikipedia how famous Pierre Landry became. He became a judge. He was a famous orator. He actually was knighted the year he died in 1916 as a Knight of the Order of St. Michael and St. George for being such a good and equitable judge between the French and the English. But his brother, Jude Landry, migrated down to the United States. And Jude actually became a grocer, which was actually part of his DNA because a lot of his relatives had been agricultural people as well. And Jude married a woman named Margaret Sloan. Jude and Margaret lived on Phillips Avenue in Lynn, Massachusetts, and they had 6 girls: Annie, Agnes, Margaret, who was known as Peggy, Frances, who was known as Fanny, Teresa, and Gertrude. Now, Gertrude and Fanny being my grandmother, Frances, were very close. And Gertrude loved to spend all her time with Fanny and her husband, John Barry, my grandfather. Actually, I think my Aunt Gert had a crush on John Barry. Gert was a wonderful storyteller, as Barry or Michelle or Jeff and myself can attest to. So here are some of the stories that I recorded in 1975.
Anyway, I was going up this day, and it was terribly windy. Everybody was running up Tremont Street like this. All the girls were running up Tremont Street, holding their clothes like this from blowing up over their heads. And Aunt Sullivan and I were together, and I don't know, all of a sudden, we were right at R.H. Stern's, and this gust came around and caught me and blew me back and landed me right in the gutter. And, dear God, I knew my shoulder was broken. And these two lovely fellows, came over. And they took their coats off and they covered me up with their coats. And they were lovely. They even came out to St. Elizabeth's Hospital with me. And so anyway, just at 12 o'clock noon, when everybody was out on the street. And the ambulance came, with the motorcycles before them and behind them and what have you. And anyway, they lifted me into the ambulance and police were in it. And Ann got the ambulance. We went all the way up Commonwealth Avenue and sirens blowing and sirens ahead of the ambulance and sirens in back of it. Oh, I thought, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. And anyway, of course, when we got to St. Elizabeth's, all these interns and doctors, were standing there because they knew there was an accident on the way, because that thing was ringing all the way up from R.H. Stern's. And they were there were about 5 doctors, and they were interns, I think, anyway. I said, don't you lay a hand on me. One of you lay a hand on me. I said, my shoulder is broken because I blew off of the sidewalk. And I want Dr. Broderick. Now, I'd never had Dr. Broderick, but I knew he was the bone man at St. Elizabeth's, and I was going to have the best. I said, I want Dr. Broderick. Nobody else. Don't touch me. Anybody else touch me. I thought that I couldn't get enough parsley. if I go in the store and the parsley was there, I'd snitch out parsley. And then I started buying it by the bunch. Then I started buying it by 2 bunches. Then I started buying it by 3 bunches. I was eating parsley wild. That's when I blew off of the sidewalk. That's when I found out that I didn't have any blood. That was the matter with me. I was sick. I didn't have. And John Spellman came out of the room and he said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "What am I doing here?" I said, I blew off of the sidewalk. And I said, "My shoulder is broken." I liked Wilson. I thought he was a good president. Didn't you like him?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you wouldn't know him. You were too young. But I liked him. I liked Wilson. The guy I didn't like was Hoover. Yeah. That bird I didn't like. Why? Oh, I don't know. He was well, I wouldn't say Yankee, but too Protestant.
How about Teddy?
Protestant. Oh, Teddy, I liked him. Teddy Roosevelt? Mm-hmm. Oh, he was a great guy. He was one of the Rough Riders. Teddy Roosevelt was a great man, and of course Franklin Delano Roosevelt was my sweetheart. I liked her too, Eleanor Roosevelt. We used to eat down in Peter's backyard. We'd go to New York, and down in Peter's backyard was down in Greenwich Village. And right across from the restaurant, there was a French and Italian restaurant we used to go to. And right across from that restaurant was Mrs. Roosevelt's house. Whenever she was in New York, that's where she used to live, in that house right there at Greenwich Village. Of course, Dan had a maid. When she didn't have a maid, I used to roll up the sleeves.
I'm taping this.
Oh, yeah? You know, my mother used to go down, and Dan had a maid by the name of, what was her name? And so we were in the dining room eating, and she was out in the kitchen eating. But my mother didn't like that very well. And my mother went out and insisted on she came into the dining room. It was on Greystone Park. And so she came. Well, the girl would rather have eaten out in the kitchen. She felt out of place. No matter no matter how nice you are to them or anything. They know their place, and they know they're not supposed to be sitting at the dining room table with the master and the mistress of the house. Mama's very idea, having a girl sitting out there in the kitchen eating alone. I wouldn't have any such nonsense. The mum would go right out and bring her in. And of course the poor girl would rather stay in the kitchen and eat a meal, because she felt a little as if she was out of place. Well, that was all right. Dan did pretty good. For somebody that never did anything. You know, she never did anything at home. And when she got married, she had a cold room in the cellar, you know. And she used to do it. Strawberries, rhubarb. Oh, I can't tell you what not she used to do it. to have down that cold room. And it was really wonderful for someone that never did anything at home. She never did anything at home at our house. But she did do up all these preserves and everything. John was crazy over strawberries. He was crazy over native strawberries. We would never go out if John wouldn't stop and buy native strawberries. He'd go out through Danvers and Middleton, and around that way, and John would always stop and buy fresh strawberries. He loved fresh strawberries. And we used to go to Worcester. This day we went to Worcester, and Mrs. Barry, she had a big oil dinner. I remember she had lovely ham, half a ham, and all the fixings and everything, and there was John and Fan and Jim and Wright and Beverly and myself, and so when we finished, of course I got up and grab everything off the table and brought them out to the kitchen. And, after a while, I became conscious that Mrs. Barry was not doing anything, but she was just standing. She was watching me. Well, of course, I had whipped the dishes out and whipped them into the kitchen, and I had put clean papers on the stove. It was, how we used to put papers on the stove in the summer when didn't have the fire there. And I had put clean papers on the stove and everything, And then I came to that Mrs. Barry wasn't doing anything. She was just standing there taking me out in. And so I stopped, and I looked at Mrs. Barry. She said, I never forget, she said, wasn't your mother blessed? Your mother, when you were born. Oh, I said, I don't know, Mrs. Barry. I said, your mother was blessed when you were born. Mrs. Barry had nobody ever did anything for her. Van wouldn't do anything. May Barry wouldn't do anything. She was another stick. Ag and I were supervisors in the Lynn office for years together, and we were friends and pals for years together. But something happened to her. I don't know what happened. She just seemed to crack like a walnut. One day we went in town every Tuesday. We'd go down to Steuben's, we'd have a couple of highballs, and we'd have a nice dinner, and we knew all the waitresses and everything down at Steuben's, and they'd always let us stay in the booth as long as we wanted to, and what have you. And we went up this day. We came out of Steuben's and we walked down as far as the Hotel Terrain. And she turned around all of a sudden. Do you know what she said? Say, you want to call this off? I said, sure. I said, if you do. We've gone together from the Lynn days in the Lynn office, And I said, sure, if you want to. Okay, she said, and she walked down Boylston Street to Washington. I walked up Tremont Street, and I sat down on one of the benches, and I said, what happened to myself? What the hell happened? And what has happened to her? So, anyway, I said to Helene, her daughter, I said, Helene, what excuse did Agnes ever give for she and I breaking up? Well, Helene said, I said, she must have given some excuse. Well, Helene said, she said you talked about her sisters. I said, I talked about her sisters. She said, yeah, she said, you talked about her sisters. Well, I said, Helene, I couldn't talk about her sisters. I could talk about Egg, your mother, plenty. But I couldn't talk about her sisters. And, well, her mind cracked up. Anyway, they put her in Danvers for a while. after that. And then they threw everybody out of Danvers to take in they threw all the crazy people out of Danvers to take in the the liquor people that were going nuts. Took them in. And so, as I say, she was Ag was in Danvers for a while and everything. And then she came home. And I don't know, I never could understand it. It's funny how people's minds go. God, we lived in the office together, we were pals, years together. We used to have an old guy, Frank Linehan. He was a contractor, and he did all the telephone business, all the telephone work. He did contracting and so forth and so on. Had plenty of money. He was married and a wife and a family. In Brighton. Of course, he didn't live with them. He lived with Statler. But he used to like us, and he used to take us out. So we'd take us out every Saturday. Through work at 5 o'clock. We would meet Frank, station, go into the Coffee Plaza, and of course, have any and every damn thing that you wanted. And we'd get a suite at the Coffee Plaza, and we'd stay at the Coffee Plaza all night. Or we'd stay off a weekend, for that matter. And I used to call my pig, and I would say, we're the Coffee Plaza pig. We're the Coffee Plaza pig. And we'd meet Frank, and we'd go to the Coffee Plaza to dinner. Or should have anything in God's name you wanted. The only thing we didn't have was liquor. We didn't drink. But we'd have everything to eat that we wanted. Always had to have, at the Coffee Plaza, at the Two Grain, we always had to have macaroons. The Terrain had marvelous macaroons, so we used to have great big dishes of macaroons, because he liked macaroons and everything. They'd be looking at me, and I'd be looking at Eddie. And then when we'd get through there, we'd go to State Ballroom on Mass Avenue. It was a good dancer friend. We'd go to the State Ballroom on Mass Avenue, and we'd dance till our lives. Then, as I say, he'd have reservations at the Coffee Plaza. We'd go back to the Coffee Plaza, and we'd stay all night at the Coffee Plaza. Ag and I'd go to church in the morning, much to our disgrace. It's the night before a holiday. I think it's New Year's Eve. So Ag was the Salem chief operator, by the way, and I had a date with her for New Year's Eve. So anyway, Frank said, Frank wanted me to go to New York. He'd get a compartment on the midnight. I said, great, sure. Wait till I get a hold of Ag. Oh no, he says, not Ag. I said, Frank, you're not asking me to go to New York alone with you on the midnight. The compartment. Why not, Gertie? Why not? I said, we've always gone together, 3 of us. He said, I never would have approached you while your mother lived. Oh, I said, so that's the story. So, well, what do you think I've been thinking, he said. Oh, God, you'll drop dead at this. What do you think I've been thinking, he said, all these years as I've been looking at those legs of yours? Oh, God, I said, I've heard everything now, Frank. I said, you're the biggest fool I've ever come in contact with. And he was a married man with a wife and a family. Plenty of money, big contractor, did all the telephone work. And give you anything. And I said, you're just a damn fool, I said. And so he said, I never would have approached you while your mother lived, Gertie. Your mother has gone. Well, I said, regardless of that, of my mother, it makes no difference. I said, nothing is any different. And so I said, I have an appointment with Agnes. And I said, I was expecting, it was New Year's Eve, and I was expecting that Frank was going to take Egg and I out and give us one hell of a grand New Year's Eve, see? But Frank wasn't. Frank was planning on taking me to New York. So I said, Frank, you've always taken us. I said, Agnes is right now sitting in the Salem office waiting for me to call her. I've got to call her. I said, I can't be. He said, well, she'd do it on you. Well, I said, maybe she would. Nevertheless, I'm not doing it on her. I said, won't you take the two of us to New York? No. No, he wouldn't. He was adamant. And I said, okay, so I said, Frank, I've got to call her. So I called Agnes in the Lynn office. She was Salem, she cooperated with it. And I said, hi, Ag. Hi, kid. I'm waiting for that damn fool to call, she said. Good God, if you didn't want him to call, she says, he'd be calling. But not a thing from it. Here he is standing right beside me at my shoulder. And here the damn fool hasn't given a call. And I said, well, let's forget it. You meet me, I said, at the Hotel Terrain. I'm at the Hotel Terrain. Meet me at the Hotel Terrain, Mr. King. No, I won't. I'm waiting for him to call, the damn fool. The damn fool, if I didn't want him to call, he'd call. Well, let's not, but of course, I know that he's not going to call, because he wants me to go to New York with him alone. And I said, oh, well, let's forget it. I said, come on in. No, we'll wait about it. Well, I had to wait. She said, you stay right there. Give me the number. And I gave it to her. You stay there, good. So I had to stay there, knowing that he wasn't going to call her. I said, listen, Frank, she is waiting for you to call her to take us out. He said, but I'm not going to call her. I'll take you over to New York, he said, for New Year's. I said, I'm not going to New York for New Year's with you. So, anyway, finally, I called Egg and I said, oh, for God's sakes, I said, Egg, take the next train from Salem into Boston. I said, will you call me? And I said, and we'll spend New Year's Eve in town. So Frank, of course, gave me $20. That was his allotment, usually. He'd pass you $20 to get something to eat. And so, of course, Frank had passed me $20, and he said, have dinner. You people have dinner, he said, on this. And all the names of the deceased was on the back of the stone, and the date of death. There was no date of death. So that's where Van got the idea, because I don't think Van got it anywhere else. Only Madge McCormick did that, so she was the cashier in the Lynn office. Madge McCormick did it, so that's where she got the idea that she wouldn't put the date of birth down, and nobody'd ever know how old she was. Who cares how old you were? So, after she died, of course, Wright had them come up and put on dates of birth. If they wouldn't have them on, Wright put them on, which was the thing to do. Well, they were going to open the French cemetery, and Papa came home this day, and Papa said, the French are going to open a cemetery across from St. Joseph's. And to Mama Mama says, they are? Yes. Papa said, well, don't you think that we ought to go up and buy a lot? Oh, don't you ever let me hear you say, don't you ever let me hear you say that again. Don't ever let me hear you say such a thing. My mother thought the whole family was going to die if you bought a lot. Oh, no. No such thing as go up and buy a lot. Whoever did such a thing? Which was a very sensible thing to do. We could have had a choice of anything in the French cemetery. Well, anyway, my father died, and we couldn't get a lot. It was the year of the flu. And 1918. The year of the flu. The swine flu. 1918. And they couldn't bury them, you know. That year of the flu, the cemetery was just filled with caskets, you know, and everything, that they couldn't get grave diggers and people to take care of those things, the people who were dying so. And that was the year that Papa died, 1918. So, anyway, there were no lots. So Father Goodrow came, of course, over the house, and Father Goodrow said, well, we're going to open up the new part of the cemetery, he said, right away. And just as soon as we open it, he said, you can bury Mr. Landry anywhere here now. But he said, but when we open up the new cemetery, he said, you can have any lot in the whole cemetery. No, my Mama says, wherever I lay him, I shall leave him. I would never have him transferred anywhere. Almost the last word that my father said was, wherever you lay me, leave me. Don't ever move me. When he was dying, it wasn't funny. It would come around almost that you would have to. So Mama said to Father Goodrow, no. She said almost like his last words were, wherever you lay me, leave me. Don't ever move me. Of course, the French didn't want us. The French wanted us in the French cemetery. And so Father Goodrow came back. He said there are just 3 lots in the cemetery. He said, you come up to the cemetery, you can have any one of the 3. So Fan and I went with Father Goodrow. He drove us up to the cemetery, and that's the lot we're in now. The lot we bought. I keep thinking about Dagmar, you know. It was just buried last week. We were so friendly, and we were so... And it doesn't seem possible to me that she died. Her life was gone. And I just say, well, of course I'll see her when I go. I imagine we go to the same place. She and I. And I don't know, I think there's so many people that I know that have died. No older than I am. Or maybe they're a little older, but they're not much. They've all died in the past year. I just say what's it going to be, what's it going to be like and everything. I don't know. Would you wonder about it? Well, of course you don't. You're too young. I just wonder what it's all about.